Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Anthony Cosenza with the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. And of course, this show is brought to you by the SB Nation family of NFL podcasts. And I am joined as usual by my co-host, not Sad Boy John this week. For those of you watching live, it's just John Sheeran this week. Just straight across the board, John Sheeran. John, how you doing, man? They're 0-2. Rough one. We'll talk about that. But how's life treating you?
Yeah, man, I'm always Sad Boy John. I don't have to title myself that every week, but yeah, I'm here. I showed up, unlike the Bengals defense.
They did not show up. They did not show up at all. And yeah, that was a very early 2018 type of performance that we saw this week against the 49ers. We'll talk about a lot of different aspects about the 49ers game, a little bit of X's and O's with that, as well as, the Jekyll and Hyde nature of this team so far through just 2 weeks, what to expect going forward, and how high is the ceiling once some of these guys return to the lineup, when some of these injured guys return. For those of you who follow John and I on Twitter, and if you don't, I don't know why you do not, but you should, we kind of engaged. Not really. We didn't engage in the conversation. We just said, hey, we should talk about this on the show. We're going to have a quarterbacks discussion and a tanking discussion based on some news that has hit the NFL wire, especially some news that involves the AFC North division and the Bengals' bitter rivals. We'll also preview the Bills game, talk about that, what to expect, some predictions in that game. And we will have the phone line open tonight. We do not have a guest to help us preview tonight, so we kind of figured, hey, let's keep the phone line open in case you guys want to call, in case you guys are not being shy and you want to talk to us about the Bengals and whatever else is on your mind. You can get in touch with us via call or text 949-542-6241. John, I actually spoke with my brother, who is a Bengals guy this week, and he was like, what are you guys going to talk about? They're 0-2. They're not playing well. There's to me, there's a lot to talk about, especially I'm especially interested in the conversation that we're going to have about quarterbacks and the future of this team personally. But I think there's a lot to talk about.
There's always a lot to talk about. If your team's really good, there's a lot to talk about with what's going right. If they're really bad, there's a lot to talk about when things go wrong. And unfortunately, over the past 4 years, we have a lot of experience about talking about a bad football team. So we're pretty much used to this.
Yeah, and ironically, the reactions post, the post-game reactions to the Week 2 loss on our YouTube channel, that was one of the highest commented and highest viewed videos on our channel, which is pretty interesting. A lot of the comments actually came from 49ers fans, it seemed, and, a lot of those 49er fans were actually very complimentary. They actually, hey, you guys are headed in the right direction.
Oh, so they lied to us.
Shake this one off. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. So they were very cordial to Bengals fans, at least from what I saw on the channel. So, there's a lot of interest still in this team, despite them being 0-2. So let's talk about what happened this past Sunday. Let's start with this, John. Did you expect that result?
I think I didn't, because I didn't think big picture wise just how much different the Seahawks and the 49ers were, and the very important facets that determined both outcomes of the game. I thought, there would be some intangible aspect about the home opener with the new head coach. Even though the offense isn't fully healthy, they could carry some of that momentum that they had in the first half against Seattle. And what we saw was just a bunch of weaknesses exploited in a perfect storm of what the 49ers did. And I think a lot of us, including myself, underrated how good the 49ers were. I thought that they were a very interesting team going into this season because they have a very smart and innovative head coach. They have a quarterback who, for the most part, in the right situation, doesn't make a lot of mistakes and is very accurate with the football, and a defense that is finally really coming together off of a lot of high round draft pick capital and investments. And just everything's really coming together at the right time for them, and it's exciting for them. And unfortunately, the Bengals just kind of ran into a team, coming together at the right time in just an embarrassing fashion, I guess, because they just were not ready for anything that San Francisco threw at them.
I was not personally overly impressed with Jimmy Garoppolo.
No,
I feel like he was a little bit more of a caretaker of the football, and at times he really didn't even do that. He threw a bad interception, and a couple of other plays where you kind of go, okay. I mean, elusiveness was good. The ability to extend plays, get out of the grasp of defensive linemen, but again, to a much larger extent than what we saw in week one, this loss was kind of about a team who, may be better or more talented or more experienced coaches, kind of a myriad of different things that could be, playing in their corner. But really, it was a team waiting for the Bengals to make mistakes. It was a team that tried to exploit some weaknesses, especially on defense, and did a good job of that, and really made the Bengals pay. And so it's nothing to take away from Jimmy Garoppolo. I'm not saying he played bad. I wasn't overly impressed with him personally. It was more, letting some of the other players do some different things, run a specific scheme against the Bengals. And they really carved up the defense to get this win here.
I think he's in the perfect spot and scenario for what he does well. And like you said, there wasn't anything overly impressive about what he did. But at the end of the day, he threw the ball 25 times. And I think he was recorded as accurate for 20 of them. And they weren't just spectacular tight window throws either. But here's really the difference between the two games. Like with Seattle, they have a quarterback who is, top 5 in the league, and Russell Wilson, and is able to put a team on, or an offense on his back. And that's essentially what they didn't do against the Bengals. They ran the ball a lot. They were really stale in their play calling, and they tried to get Chris Carson more involved when they have a great quarterback in Russell Wilson. Then they kind of took the game out of his hands for most of it up until the very end when they eventually pulled away. With the 49ers, they're like, okay, Jimmy, you're just the driver of this fully modded Mustang, and you're just going to get behind the wheel, turn on cruise control, and we're going to ride ourselves to 41 points. The differences in this game were really just Kyle Shanahan's play calling versus Brian Schottenheimer's play calling. And Shanahan's just an offensive genius, and he's one of the more consistent play callers in the league. So it was that play calling, the personnel groupings that he used compared to what Seattle used, and just how much better and more athletic and powerful San Francisco's offensive line was. Because honestly, the defensive line for the Bengals, it just was completely nullified. It looked nothing like they did against Seattle, and I think there's a major difference in those groups as well. And then you combine all that up against a defense that has the worst linebacking core in the league, look even worse against what they did. And again, a defensive line just couldn't get off blocks and whatnot. And what San Francisco did a lot, especially in the running game when they ran 250 yards, a lot of misdirections, a lot of counters, a lot of pre-snap motions. And again, if you have linebackers who are very slow into their fits, and Preston Brown and Nick Vigil, and can't get off blocks, and then you have all that pre-snap movement and then misdirections and counters going your way, it makes them even worse. And I'm going to throw a lot of numbers at you guys, so just bear with me here. So San Francisco ran 21 personnel. 21 personnel is 2 receivers, one tight end, and 2 running backs for 17 plays. That was the second most in week 2 for any offense. They had a 76% success rate. Success rate is basically moving the ball on whatever down to basically achieve a first down. First down success rate is 40% to a first down. Second down is 50% to a first down. And third down success rate is obviously converting the first down. 76% rate. That was the most in the NFL for that personnel grouping on the second most plays run out of that personnel grouping. That's insane. They ran 6 pass plays out of that personnel grouping for 83% success rate. They ran the ball 11 times out of that personnel grouping for a 73% success rate. 22 personnel. That's even more bunched. That's 2 receivers and 2 tight ends that's 2 running backs, 2 running backs and 2 tight ends. So that's even more bunched up. That's 18 plays that they ran. That's the most in the league. 61% success rate. That was the most, those 18 plays were the most ran by any team by 8 plays. They ran 3 pass plays out of that for 100% success rate, 15 runs out of that for 53% success rate. So that's really what Kyle Shanahan's offense is. It's really just condensing the formation, getting everybody into the box. And when you have a defense that's not very athletic, it's not very good at reading plays, and then you're getting all this misdirection and then attacking the perimeter of the defense when everybody's slow to react, it was just a perfect storm of disaster. And that's where the 250 yards on the run came from. That's where all the play action passes for Garoppolo to get explosive plays down the field. Compared to Seattle's game plan, it was just so much more complex and intriguing and so much more able to attack the weaknesses that Cincinnati has. So really, this was just a tale of two defenses that we saw. And unfortunately, the defense that we saw against San Francisco is so much more volatile to a more modernized offense that it may be the more common thing that we see going forward in this season.
Yeah, great stuff there, John. Great research there. I mean, I spoke to some people that are very familiar with the 49ers and some folks that, have watched quite a bit of 49ers football, know about Kyle Shanahan. And, Kyle Shanahan basically said leading up to the week that, they found some things on tape, talking about the Bengals defense. They found some things on tape against Seattle. They looked at what Seattle did or was unable to do against the Bengals defense. And they did a lot of different types of runs, like you mentioned, the misdirections, the things. Really what it kind of came down to for me, and this is a far more simplistic and far less intelligent type of presentation than you just made, John.
Don't sell yourself short like that. I mean,
really, to me, they tried to get those Bengals linebackers to move laterally as much as possible. And they could, and those guys, that is not their strength. Their strength is going downhill, trying to tackle and make plays there. Now, Vigil had some, combine workouts where he supposedly has some agility and whatnot, but he has shown that is not a strength of his. Preston Brown has shown that is not a strength of his. So that's why you saw a lot of those runs, a lot of those screen passes go out to the outside, swing it outside, and try and get those linebackers out of position, try and get them to move laterally, which is not their strength. And they made the Bengals play. Now, I want to transition into something kind of similar, and it's kind of a little bit of player regression. It's a little bit of why isn't this guy playing, that sort of thing. You look at linebackers, you draft Jermaine Pratt. He didn't even take a defensive snap in week 2.
He's a bystander.
That is your biggest position of need, or arguably one of your biggest positions of need, one of your weakest position groups on the team. You wait until the 3rd round to get this guy. Supposedly you really like him. He has a real well-rounded skill set. Not a defensive snap. You see the issues plaguing the defense at linebacker. Why draft the kid? Why not play him in a game that's out of control at least later to get him some snaps? I don't get it.
I don't get it either, man. Like you saw Brown and Vigil just get continuously exposed. Like it's just what the 49ers do, man. They have these athletic offensive linemen. George Kittle is the most all-around complete tight end in the game, getting after. He threw Nick Vigil to the ground multiple times in this game.
Yep.
It was just embarrassing to see. Like, not only are they slow, but they're slow to react. That's just the worst combination that you can have. I don't know what the reason for not trusting Pratt out there, because again, like the Bengals were in nickel for most of this game. Like they're always going to be this season. They didn't have Evans out there, in any base scenario, and obviously they didn't have Pratt. And unfortunately, you had not only Sean Williams play in the box so much because of the nature of how condensed their formations were. You also had Jesse Bates play in the box for about 19 of his 70 snaps. That's a lot more than he's used to playing that close to the line of scrimmage. And he struggled too. He's obviously extremely athletic in his own right, but he's not used to playing so close to the line of scrimmage, and his angles were completely off. So when you have so much condensed formations where you have a lot of box defenders at the same time, but you also have an offensive line that gets so much push in the first level, and then you basically make it a horizontal game where you run to the outside and run these stretches, run these jet sweeps and whatnot. And you have guys who are in this tight area reading wrong off a misdirection and then basically beating to the edge. And this seems like a situation where Pratt would have been a hell of a lot more preferable than Preston Brown, who was just looked like an elephant out there. And I don't know. I have no idea why they didn't play him. I really don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me.
It doesn't to me either. And we'll talk a little bit about the draft a little bit later and the Bengals' approach to that. We'll talk about that a little bit later in a different segment coming up here. But you needed this draft for immediate impact players. You have to go all the way to the 3rd pick of the 4th round. So basically the Bengals, I think 6th or 7th selection total in this year's class to even find a guy who starts. And oh, by the way, he got hurt in the game and left. That's Michael Jordan. So, I mean, that is not what you want out of a rookie head coach's draft class in terms of immediate impact guys. You're not getting anything out of your first initial picks of this class, which is really a shame. I'm glad you brought up Williams and Bates. I don't want to harp on them too much because really it was a collective defensive collapse, but They are currently ranked as two of the worst safeties by Pro Football Focus. Very surprising to me because they both basically led the team in tackles last year. They led the team in interceptions last year. They were really the lone bright spots of the defense in it last year, and they are playing a much different brand of football, a much worse brand of football. Do you directly attribute that to what you just said, them needing to play closer to the line of scrimmage because of the linebacker issues and them trying to mask that? Or is there a different regression happening because of the cycling through different defensive coordinators so frequently over the past couple of years?
Yeah, I think obviously with Bates, him playing that close is just not good for him. And obviously he's a free safety. He's going to play most of his snaps as a free safety. But Bates right now is just, he doesn't look very comfortable in this defense. And they're playing a lot of cover one and cover three, where you have Sean Williams playing in the box, or you have Clayton Fedulum playing in the box as like a third linebacker when you're forced to get more box defenders up there. But like the Williams issues, we kind of saw that in the preseason, right? He took bad angles and was struggling covering tight ends. So maybe that's an issue that's carrying over. Maybe he's just regressing as a player overall. I think it's a little bit too early for us to kind of concern ourselves large picture with Bates. He might just be going through a struggle. This is kind of what William Jackson did last year in his sophomore year, where he just wasn't getting comfortable with a new defense. And maybe that is the thing. Maybe Anarumo's scheme is not exactly doing the best for him. I think obviously Russell going from Russell Wilson to then Kyle Shanahan's Jimmy Garoppolo offense is tough for any secondary to kind of handle. Well, I think for Bates, it's more of a wait and see kind of thing, because I think he's still really talented. And I think this scheme, for the most part, puts him in proper plays. But right now, he's just getting burned, and that's the testament for the entire defense.
Yeah. So, a couple of big questions here to kind of wrap up a little bit of what we're talking about with the 49ers blowout, the home opener. And side note, in case you didn't really have a good look at the schedule, that was the Bengals' only home game in the month of September. And you lose by 24 points. That's not how you want to draw that up. So effort level, particularly on defense. Do you question the effort level at all on the defense, or is it simply, I mean, I saw a lot of missed tackles. I saw a lot of second chance opportunities by the 49ers running backs, by their receivers to gain further yards because of poor tackling, and really few players were immune to that issue. I saw Jimmy Garoppolo escape some pressure that probably could have been or should have been a sack or two. So, I think that's one area where I say, okay, where's the effort level? But is that really, I don't know. Are there other issues at play there? And I'm overstating the possibility of a lack of effort.
Like the tackling last week was not nearly as big of an issue as it was this week. There was one play in particular I remember. It was like a 3rd and 1, and the 49ers just ran like inside zone towards the left, and it was up against that 5-2 look that the Bengals are deploying now with 3 defensive tackles. Geno completely resets the line of scrimmage. He blows up the point of attack. It's great and all. Then you have Billings and Glasgow just getting washed out, and you have the entire second level kind of going with the flow of the play. So there's just a big congested blob towards where this play is kind of flowing in terms of where the direction is. So the running back just cuts back, and then you have those force and fill players, William Jackson and Nick Vigil, who's coming back from behind, just completely whiff. And it was like it looked like Avonta's perfect whiff from last year, where it's just like this guy is just dazed and confused and doesn't know what he's doing. And we just saw that multiple times in this game, and that run ended up being like 38 yards just off of just like a third read by the running back, and he made like 3 guys miss without really doing anything. So like honestly, like they were just so completely and utterly outmatched and out game plan. I think there could have just been a mental thing where like we just can't keep up, and I don't know what mental toll that takes on players who presumably had some sense of confidence coming into this game because of how they played in week 1. But like, man, this would just be such a rally call for Lou Anarumo and the other defensive coaches on this team to just basically guys, what are we doing? Like, this isn't 2018 anymore. We can't keep playing like this. Like, I know the offense isn't nearly as good as it should be, but like this was just embarrassing on multiple levels. And I think the effort level was definitely part of that.
Yeah, so glad you brought up Vontez Burfict. We put up a Twitter poll we on our Twitter account just asking Bengals fans, do you miss Vontez Burfict? And really that was in light of the linebacker issues that were very obviously on display in week 2. 27% said yes, 61% said no, and 12% said it's too early to tell. So some people miss Burfict. I've seen a couple of Raiders games and he's kind of making some plays, but looking a little bit closer to the Vontez Burfict of old, not the one we saw last couple of years there. But, a couple of other big questions here, John, and I think this is probably the most important, but real Jekyll and Hyde nature by the Cincinnati Bengals from week 1 to week 2. You would think that the results would have been reversed, right? You would think they would have had, the week to kind of prepare and adjust. They're going back home. Maybe a perceived weaker team than a Seahawks team. Regardless, very, a dichotomy of different results from week 1 and week 2 from the Cincinnati Bengals. Personally speaking, I think they're probably somewhere in the middle of both of those teams in terms of who they actually are for 2019. What do you think?
Well, like they're 0-2 and they have like a point differential of like negative 25. So at the end of the day, like in between is still a fairly bad team.
Right.
I just think like it was just so dependent upon who they were playing and how smart their opponent was to just take advantage of their weaknesses. Like if they play a team like Seattle, who had 82% of 11 personnel and just took the game out of the hands of the quarterback for about 40 minutes, they're gonna have a shot because again, Seattle's defense wasn't that good. But like San Francisco, that's like more times than not what you're going to see in terms of play calling and athleticism on all 3 levels of their defense. Like at home, like I would say they're more closer to what they were in week 2 than what they were in week 1. Because I think they were just able to take advantage of deficiencies in Seattle's game plan and play calling. But like it's depressing, obviously, because they got blown out by 24 at home. But the good news is like the schedule is still not tremendously difficult. Like,
Yeah.
they have the Jets on docket like late in the year. They have obviously the Dolphins, and a couple of other easy opponents. But like I need to see something like change. I can't just assume that things are going to get better, even if they do get a little bit healthier, because these issues, specifically with the linebackers and just nullifying that pass rush with certain types of play calling, those issues aren't going to go away overnight. And unless the offense completely carries them, which I don't find very likely with a crappy run game and a so-so passing game, it's just these issues are just going to keep persisting.
Yeah, we can't. We're sitting here kind of harping on the defense and the poor performances there. Bengals let up a number of sacks again. The offensive line, they're unable to run the football, so major issues on the offensive line. That can't go overlooked either. I guess then the question kind of offshooting from the last question, if you kind of feel that there may be more of the, poorer team or, so they're not going to fare very well the rest of the season, or they're not going to fare well in the immediate future. Do you think that the return of injured players, possibly Jonah Williams, if that happens at all this year, AJ Green, which seems like it will be relatively soon, Cordy Glenn, all of these guys that have been sitting out that are pretty high profile players for this team, do you see if they do return that will have a noticeable jump and have a much bigger impact and avoid losses like we saw in week 2, or it'll help, but not by that much.
Yeah, it's just weird to assume that because in this game alone, like the Bengals right now have 9 guys who missed Wednesday's practice. One of them being Carl Lawson, Ryan Glasgow. Like
Right.
injuries will pop up the entire year. So as soon as Glenn and Green get back, you could be suffering from other major injuries as well. Like this team has proven that they can't stay healthy throughout the year. I think the return of Jonah Williams makes this offensive line better, whether he's at left tackle or right tackle. Whenever Glenn does get back, I'm not sure what we're exactly going to get, because we're talking about a guy who's now missed over a month with a concussion. So when he comes back, I wonder what type of player we're going to get, because even last year he was just a so average player, and for the most part that's what you're getting with both Andre Smith and Bobby Hart, maybe giving those guys a little bit too much credit. But I think a healthy Jonah Williams definitely makes this team better. Obviously, a healthy AJ Green over Damian Willis makes the passing game better in that sense. But at the same time, they have to remain healthy and become healthy before those two get back for them to really make a total net positive difference. Because unfortunately, with this team, injuries will pop up more times than not.
Speaking of, we'll get to that in just a sec. But yeah, I mean, the injuries are killing this team. But like you said, I mean, they happen all over the league, and this team was really not very well prepared for both of their starting tackles, or left guard, left tackle going down with significant injuries early in the season. They were not well prepared. They did not have ample depth on the offensive line, really throughout much of the offensive line, to prepare for that. So, that's obviously things will improve when some of these star players come back, but definitely not a given. Not the result that the Bengals would have hoped for in their home opener. 41-17 was the end result against San Francisco, and the 49ers continue to haunt the Bengals in terms of historical dominance, I suppose. Before we get to our next segment, I want to just touch on some real brief kind of league news and notes in case some of you have not heard or maybe have been living in a bomb shelter. I don't know. But Ben Roethlisberger out for the year, elbow surgery. So he is done for the Pittsburgh Steelers for the year. John mentioned that the Bengals schedule gets a bit easier down the stretch. Obviously, no Ben Roethlisberger, as well as no Antonio Brown, Le'Veon Bell for that team. That makes that contest a bit easier, at least on the surface. Drew Brees is set to miss for the New Orleans Saints, set to miss a pretty significant amount of time with a thumb ligament injury. Sounds pretty similar to what Andy Dalton has suffered a couple of times. So he is out of the lineup. Going back to the Steelers, they have traded a first-round pick, a 2020 first-round pick, for defensive back Minkah Fitzpatrick. Obviously, the Miami Dolphins engaging in a fire sale. So they've gotten rid of quite a few players so far. Apparently have others on the open market if teams want to call and get them. Kenyon Drake and others apparently are available for trade if they want to get those players. So a lot of different things going on around the league. The Jets, you mentioned another team that the Bengals play later in the season. Sam Darnold, their first-round rookie quarterback from last year, has mono. That's a new one for me. I haven't heard that. So, hey, Sam, maybe don't hit the town so frequently, buddy. And you won't get the mono. So, a lot of different stuff happening around the league. I'm sure I'm missing a few other big. Jalen Ramsey is another guy that's supposedly maybe on the trade market. He's supposed to play on Thursday night for the Jaguars. We'll see exactly what happens there. The Bengals do not appear to be in the market for him or any other players that have some trade rumors around them, but still interesting landscape around the NFL right now, given injuries, trade rumors, all of that stuff. And we wanted to keep you updated on that, as well as provide a nice segue for our next segment too. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. He's John Sheeran. I'm Anthony Cosenza. We welcome those of you who may be new to the program. Thanks for tuning in live here on our usual weekly show on YouTube and Cincy Jungle. And thanks to all of you who listen to the podcast after the fact. You can get it on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, and Megaphone as well. So really anywhere you get your podcast, you can find our show. Thanks for tuning in, and we appreciate all the support you've shown us, especially despite an 0-2 start by the 2019 Bengals.
Yeah, just real quick, can you imagine AJ Green's reaction if they traded for Jalen Ramsey?
Wow. Yeah, that would be, talk about an awkward locker room exchange there. And of course, anyone who knows AJ Green or has been around him or has heard him in interviews, he is the most low-key guy of all time. So that thing from, what was that, 2 years ago?
Yeah.
That was obviously a very out of character thing.
Yeah. Well, speaking of 2 years ago, the Bengals started the 2017 season 0-3. And over the past 20 years, there haven't been, I believe, 98 or 97 teams who have started 0-3. One of those teams has made the playoffs. It was actually last year with the Houston Texans. Deshaun Watson led an insane campaign for the last 13 weeks. So this week 3 game against the Bills that we're going to talk about later is of paramount importance because right now Bengals are 0-2, and over that same time period, the last 20 years, about 10% of teams have gone on to make the playoffs. So right now, it's basically an all but foregone conclusion that the Bengals will not make the playoffs and will miss the playoffs for the 4th straight year now. So that really opens up, I guess, a big picture topic discussion. Like, where do the Bengals go from here in terms of the 2019 season? This is Zach Taylor's first year. They obviously want to evaluate what the roster is so they can decide who they want to keep long term. Under a new head coach, obviously, they had a lot of roster turnover this year, but there's going to be even more of that because this is the year that the 2016 draft class is going to be up for renegotiation and contracts. Some guys from 2017 are going to have one or two more years left on their deals. So there's just a lot of, I guess, uncertainty with the state of this roster and the state of a lot of weak positions or whatnot. But when the team is bad, you honestly just got to look at how the quarterback is playing. And I know there's been a lot of support for Andy Dalton right now because he's second in the league in passing yards. He's got a 4-to-1 TD to interception ratio. His pass rating is kind of high. All these conventional stats that don't really have a lot of weight. He's doing pretty well. The fact of the matter is, for the per play advanced metrics, he's been pretty below average so far. And there was a topic, just this offseason about, is Dalton the guy under Taylor long term? Are they going to commit to him for a third contract? There's been comments that Mike Brown made and whatnot. So they're not going to make the playoffs this year. More likely than not, they're not going to make the playoffs this year, despite a soft schedule. And they have a quarterback who's going to be entering the last year of his contract. So I am not personally suggesting that they tank because I don't think they're really good enough or bad enough to tank. I think they could just lose on their own because they're just not very good. And unfortunately, injuries are doing a good part of that. But at the same time, you have things going on like what's happening in Miami, who are just really reinventing the wheel when it comes to tanking. But say that they do tank, I guess. And this was a topic that Anthony wanted to discuss. Do you even trust the Bengals to tank right and get the quarterback? Because per Anthony, apparently the Bengals are not very good at drafting quarterbacks, at least from a historical perspective. But at the same time, it could be the best chance that they have of progressing this franchise into the future. So, Anthony, what do you think?
Well, first of all, I want to preface this with a couple of different things. This isn't an anti-Andy Dalton bashing session. This isn't, that sort of thing. I know there's a lot of passionate Dalton lovers out there. And, as far as what he's done for the team, he's been a productive quarterback. He's a heck of a guy, heck of a human being. So this isn't, a bash Andy Dalton thing. But I mean, the reality is we're now in our 9th year here, another 0-2 start, no playoff wins under Andy Dalton. That sort of thing, that sort of thing. So I also want to preface it with the Bengals have a spotty track record of drafting quarterbacks. Obviously, you've got Ken Anderson, I believe, was a 3rd-round pick, and Boomer Esiason was a 2nd-round pick. Hit on those, obviously. Carson Palmer, you can call a hit at number 1. Obvious ups and downs in his career, but very productive quarterback. You can call Andy Dalton a hit in the top of the 2nd round. But there were 2 major misses in between those 2 eras of quarterbacks. And it's not just the draft, John. The 2 major misses, of course, number 6 overall, David Klingler back in 91, 92. And then, of course, Akili Smith in 99, number 3 overall, where the Bengals did not take the glut of picks from Mike Ditka that could have reshaped the entire franchise. And ironically, the Bengals were so afraid that he or somebody else was going to get Akili Smith, which they did not. They got Ricky Williams. So we know the history there, but the Bengals obviously flopped on both of those picks. Some of that is probably on the quarterbacks themselves, the system. Obviously, some of that is the Bengals not doing enough as a team, propping them up properly. But I don't know that I fully trust them, unless they have the number 1 overall pick. I don't know if I really fully trust them to take the best guy out there. This team does not have, for a team that uses the draft as its lifeblood, they have one of the smallest scouting staffs in the NFL. They still send their coaches out to the pro day stuff. And granted, they need to do some of that, but usually that is your scouting department. Largely, it is your general manager. The Bengals have a de facto general manager, I guess. But, there's the fact remains that is not their area of strength, scouting and player development, that sort of thing. Recently, the Bengals in the first round have Cedric Abwehi, William Jackson, that's kind of a hit. The list goes on and on. John Ross, that's been this, Billy Pry. I mean, they haven't been very consistent in the top rounds of the draft lately. So I worry about the Bengals. If they tank, can they do it properly? Can they get the right guy and the guy that can change a franchise as a quarterback? That's my worry.
I think my one thing is that they just need to try, I think, for once, because like the whole reason why like this conversation even sparked was because the Steelers, they traded that first round pick for Minka Fitzpatrick, and that effectively took them out of contention for drafting a quarterback in the first round next year, which is why I supported the move as a Bengals fan or someone who covers the Bengals. And someone said on Twitter, well, the Bengals will probably get jumped by another team getting a quarterback. And that prompted me to say the Bengals have had the chance in the last 3 years to draft Patrick Mahomes, Deshaun Watson, Josh Rosen. Say what you want about him. He's still got talent. Lamar Jackson and Dwayne Haskins. All, between picks 9 through like 21.
Yeah.
So obviously having the first overall pick or a top 5 pick helps you get in a quarterback. But in recent years, some quarterbacks have fallen in the first round as well. So the object of tanking itself for a first round quarterback loses a little bit of weight when you talk about that. But at the same time, like, they passed on those guys because they weren't looking for those guys. They weren't interested in drafting Haskins this year. They had high grades on both Watson and Mahomes, but they weren't interested in drafting a quarterback then. They were content with what Dalton is, and they were content with building around him. Well, with those 3 picks that they passed on, those quarterbacks, they drafted guys to help Dalton. One of them is John Ross, like you just said, who's now becoming a decent player, but had 2 years of basically ineffectiveness outside of some red zone touches. Billy Price just got benched, and unfortunately now he's starting because of Michael Jordan injury, but that was a complete whiff as a first-round pick. And now Jonah Williams, who you hope is your franchise left tackle, but he's not even impacting the team right now because he's injured. So in an attempt to build around the quarterback, they haven't even done a very successful job of that. So when you go 9 years into this process of just making everything great around the quarterback, they aren't even good at that. So I just think that at this point, you have to try the other option, which is get a quarterback where you don't have to have this perfect fantasy island of surrounding talent and perfect environment. Just get a quarterback that is good at the things that Dalton isn't and is able to carry a team who doesn't have the perfect offense line, who doesn't have a trio of AJ Green, Tyler Boyd, and John Ross, and even Tyler Eifert at tight end, who doesn't have a consistently good defense, who may have to score 30 points to win, which unfortunately for Dalton is just not his forte in that sense. So I just think that at a certain point, you just got to wake up and say, hey, we're not going to be able to get 2015. That was a lightning in a bottle, of once every 30 years type thing. We just got to go out and get a quarterback that we can compete with the Mahomes, with the Watsons, that unfortunately we passed up for other guys.
Yeah, I don't disagree with what you're saying there. And I think to kind of put a little ray of sunshine on this, you mentioned it's unlikely, given the 0-2 start, that the Bengals make the playoffs this year. It is, to me, for many other teams that would be in this position, it is possible for this team to not only gain some momentum, get competitive towards the end of the year, maybe not make the playoffs, but start showing signs of progression and growth under Zach Taylor at the end of the year. Maybe you have that no man's land draft pick in the teens or something like that because you've won 7 games, for instance. You can still, and teams do this all the time. That's how the Chiefs moved up to get Patrick Mahomes. I think Houston moved up.
I mean, they did.
You are still able to be competitive and move up in the draft and get a quarterback of the future. The Bengals are able to do that. They can still salvage this season and look ahead to next season and jump up and get a quarterback. When one of these names of the myriad of names over the next year or two that seem to be franchise-changing guys. They choose not to do that. They choose to sit on their hands in the draft, and the draft, again, is their lifeblood, yet they don't want to move up and get these impact players. They would rather get guys that are value guys that are best player available. So that drives me nuts. Going to your comments about the Steelers, I put out this information. This kind of plays into what I'm just talking about. The last time the Steelers had a losing record was in 2003. They won. They had won 10 games with Tommy Maddox the year prior, but in 2003 they won 6 games. That put them at the number 11 pick. Guess who they took at number 11? Ben Roethlisberger.
Yeah.
He turned out to be pretty good. The last time the Steelers had a number 1 overall pick or anything that was in the top 5 to 10 pick, you have to go back to 1969. Do you know who they picked?
Is it Mean Joe?
Terry Bradshaw.
Oh, okay.
So that is a team that you can trust. And even with Ben Roethlisberger sidelined, they knew Ben Roethlisberger was done for the year. What'd they do? They've salvaged a first-round pick to go get a defensive back that they think can help them because they're not giving up on this year. So my point in bringing that up is kind of what I was just talking about. The Bengals can still salvage this season. They can be competitive, maybe even vie for the playoffs if they get healthy, things fall right, they grow under Zach Taylor, whatever. They can do that and still go up and trade future draft capital to move up in 2020 and get one of these guys. And I don't know that if that takes place, or even if they're kind of again in that no man's land, that pick 10 to 20 with Andy Dalton at quarterback, I don't know that I would trust them to move up and get a quarterback unless Zach Taylor is absolutely pounding the table.
Yeah, I wouldn't trust them to do that either unless we see completely unusual activity in free agency. And they don't like to sacrifice draft capital because that's how they build the bulk of the roster turnover, by accumulating as many draft picks as possible. Now, in terms of being in no man's land, like my whole thing like with that is that if you scout right, you can find quality players in the 10 to 20 range. So you don't have to be in the top 10 to grab the best players in the draft. Even for them specifically, like they do better in the second round than they do in the first round in terms of recent years and finding talent and finding core pieces. I think you have a point, because what the Dolphins are doing, like I don't think that Brian Flores is going to be there very long. Unfortunately for him, he might just be a Bill Belichick sleeper agent in the AFC East for all I know. But I think they're just building for something that is not there right now. What the Bengals need, like at some point, you have to establish a winning culture, and this is an opportunity to do that. Even if you're not good, I think they can still try. And again, they're not as talented as many people would think, and they're just not going to win very many games. But I don't think they need to tank to get where they need to go. I think they can still try to do what they want to accomplish and maybe end up in a decent spot in the draft. But like for Zach Taylor, they're going to be in with him and his coaching staff and the guys they brought in for the long term, and establishing some sense of a winning culture, some sense of a culture where players want to be there and not, throw in the towel after week 3. I think that's important for them, and it's different in terms of Miami. So yes, I would like for their draft pick to be as high as possible. No, I don't trust them to be smart with that draft pick, but yes, I do think that no matter what they do, they're not going to be very successful, but they should definitely still try to be, in terms of just making sure that this is a place where other players want to play, and making sure that Zach Taylor has the right message going into 2020.
Yeah. And I want to go back to what I was saying at the onset of this segment, when you had asked me about, kind of clarifying some of my stances on this. The other issue, and I guess I've just been around this team a little too long, but the other issue is when they have fielded guys from free agency to man the quarterback spot. Fitzpatrick, granted, he was going into that season as a backup anyway. That was it wasn't terrible, but it was not great. You go even further when the Achille debacle was happening. You had Scott Mitchell, you had Neil O'Donnell. I don't even trust him to bring in a proper quarterback free agent wise, unless, it's a Peyton Manning situation or something that comes around once in a blue moon. So, I kind of wanted to add that to my point. And luckily, if the Bengals do not hit in the draft on a high pick and a quarterback, it is far less crippling to a franchise, especially financially, than it used to be because of the CBA. So, if a guy is a bust, it doesn't really it doesn't really matter as much. To your point, like why not?
Why not try? There's no better time in the NFL history to just draft as many quarterbacks as possible. If you don't have one, you should always be looking for one. Which has always been the problem.
Yep. And one thing I wanted to ask you, and you can maybe this will tip your hand on maybe who's one of your favorite guys. Obviously, Lawrence is a guy that's coming out in 2021, so he's a little bit down the road. There are a handful of guys next year, probably Tua and Justin Herbert are the two top guys. I mean, are all three of these guys in your eyes ones who can overcome some of these organizational deficiencies of the Bengals, kind of rise above, like a Boomer? Granted, the team around Boomer was insane. Like a Ken Anderson, maybe to certain aspects, Carson Palmer and Andy Dalton. But, I mean, do you think that one of those guys has the skill level, has maybe the mindset? I don't want to make this a draft episode, but
yeah.
Do you think, just kind of looking at the tools there, the makeup of them, are those guys that you can say, you know what, those are guys that can put the teams on their back and kind of navigate around the slow free agency, the poor drafting, the small scouting department, the no indoor facility, all of that stuff?
I'll even throw one more name in there, Jalen Hurts. Like, I want to draft as many Oklahoma quarterbacks as possible, but yeah, like we're not going into what these guys do best, but yeah, those are the guys that you're looking for, the guys who can overcome certain deficiencies. I'm not sure if I can speak for Hubbard specifically because he's probably the guy I've watched the least, and I think he's probably got the most questions with him. Unfortunately, I think most of us knew that we were going to overhype Trevor Lawrence this offseason. He's only just a sophomore, and he's not obviously God himself out there. He's still working through the motions, but I really like Tua. Obviously, I think he's got an incredible arm. Obviously, I think there's a different possession we look at in terms of lefties, especially a short lefty who doesn't really look the part, but I think he's almost exactly what they need, and he's going to go pretty high in the draft. But yeah, like any of those guys, I think has the capability and has the potential to be much more than what they have at quarterback now. And if that's a guy that doesn't need a perfect scenario around him, that's exactly what they should be looking for.
Yeah, I mean, I like the Herbert kid. He's got a lot of tools, but like you said, there are some questions there. There are other guys. I think that Fromm kid is another one that's floating out there. There are a few names over the next couple of years, so a lot of names to choose from. Look, I said this in an interview I did earlier this week with an ESPN station in Rochester, New York. They had asked me, what's the deal with Dalton, and are they hoping for a Rich Gannon type of thing? And maybe that's what happens under Zach Taylor. Maybe Dalton just needed that guy. And really, if you look at the first couple of weeks, there's been a lot of plays that have been drawn up that play to Andy Dalton's strengths: the short passes, the intermediate passes, the timing routes, the quote unquote throwing guys open, all that kind of stuff. That plays to Andy Dalton's strengths, and maybe Zach Taylor can continue to, raise the level of play and things get better down the road. Maybe we're overreacting a little bit because of week 2, but I think it's an interesting discussion. Obviously, regardless of if Andy Dalton is your favorite guy or not, given his contract situation, given the fact that he's coming up on double-digit years in the league, this is a discussion that's going to need to happen sometime in the near future anyway. With the Bengals potentially moving on from him. So I think it's worth addressing, and it's kind of a scary prospect a little bit, putting your faith in the Bengals and off-season, knocking an off-season out of the park.
Yeah, but we're playing the Bills this week, and say what you want about Josh Allen, but they're in a much better position now than they were a couple years ago when they didn't have that franchise quarterback. Yeah. They're in a position to build a team around him under a cheap rookie contract, and obviously Allen still has issues to go through, but they've established a great culture up there. They have a good defense. They invested a ton in the offensive line, and they're 2-0 and a pretty solid team that is a touchdown favorite over the Bengals, who are unfortunately still in purgatory.
Yep. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. We've been talking about a lot of different stuff, including the loss against the 49ers in week 2 and a little bit of a debate going forward about what the Bengals could do, should do at the quarterback position, especially in the near future going forward, and the fact that they're 0-2, and we don't really know the direction that they're heading going forward. We'll be taking some calls. I think if we've got some time or some text, if you want to hit us up. We are running a little longer than usual here, so we'll try and squeeze them in if we're able, and or if you want to give us a call, 949-542-6241, or you can text us if that's more your jam. We'll try and get your questions on the air there if we've got some time. If you're new to the show, you can get it on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, Megaphone, YouTube, and all of our stuff is on Cincy Jungle. John and I also do some writing for cincyjungle.com. Great place for Bengals news, opinions, analysis, breaking news, all kinds of different stuff. So check that out as well. John, you teased that the Bengals now travel to Buffalo to take on the Bills. I don't know that I think someone, maybe it was Jamie Craig or somebody in the, I'd have to look in the live YouTube chat, but I'm kind of back to week one where I don't know what to expect. It could be very similar to week two, or it could be something that it seems to be week one. I mean, the Bills 2-0, respect. They're playing pretty solid football. I don't think they're world beaters at this moment. I think they're beatable, especially on their home turf, but we'll see. Initial thoughts from you and or things that you think could be playing in the Bengals corner this week.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think a lot of Bengals fans have much respect for what the Bills are, but they're, I think, 12th in defensive DVOA, 16th in offensive DVOA. They're just a solid team right now, and obviously it's only through 2 weeks, but there's just not a ton of holes on that roster, specifically with the defense. All three levels of that defense has star players, and when you have a quarterback like Josh Allen, who for the most part is very volatile, but you can do some fun things with him, and when you put a decent offensive line up there and a promising running game, there's just a lot of potential for this game to be a lot worse than maybe some people imagine it. And I think, like you said, back to week one, I think we all thought the Seahawks were just a better overall team, and that game was primarily close because of what Seattle did and didn't do in terms of a play calling standpoint. I think there's going to be a lot similar factors with that. We just talked about, the 49ers usage of 21 personnel against the Bengals and how that ate them up. Right now, the Bills, I think, are a top 5 team in terms of success rate using 21 personnel. So if they stick to that and, they use Allen's mobility and his ability to get outside the pocket and make plays on the move and really tire the Bengals defense out for the second straight week in Buffalo, which is notoriously a tough place to play, this could be easily a 1 or 2 score victory for Buffalo. But if they don't end up sticking to what they're good at and keep the Bengals in the game, I think this is a good opportunity for the Bengals offense or the Bengals defense to kind of come back and take advantage of a quarterback who is mistake prone, who isn't the most accurate, and to kind of collapse down on a running game if it gets stale. So this game has the potential, in my opinion, to go either way. The spread is very unfair to the Bengals right now because of what they did in week 2 and the fact that they're playing a 2-0 team at home. But again, that desperation factor. No one wants to start 0-3. It's even worse than 0-2. And it really just depends on what they took away from the 49ers game to bounce back and improve, because if they drop this game, this season is really over.
Yeah, Carlos Dunlap called the last week an aberration. Obviously, players say that a lot after a loss. I believe him to an extent, but I don't know if I fully buy in to that. What do you think?
We have eyes. We saw what happened in 2018. We just talked about, this team builds through the draft and doesn't do much in free agency. Their 2 big additions in this offseason was BW Webb and Jermaine Pratt. BW Webb has looked nothing more than just average to below average, and Pratt didn't play. So that defense we saw out there, that was all last year. The only thing that changed were the coaches, and they got completely exposed against a brilliant offensive line. So is it an aberration, or is it just more than what we saw from last year? Again, the things we saw against Seattle are promising, but that was just an opportune moment up against a clueless play caller who, to his credit, did much better against Pittsburgh. I'm talking about Brian Schottenheimer for Seattle, but I need to see more than that for me to buy that this was an aberration, because this is just more of the same, which is literally the same personnel that we saw last year.
What do you think the Bengals need to do in the run game to be more effective? I mean, obviously the offensive line is a mess, and that's going to just be the case at least for a while. Maybe it improves if Cordy Glenn comes back this week. Who knows what's going to happen to left guard, because it looks like Michael Jordan's probably not going to be out there. So what are either play calls, do you think, or I don't know, what are they not doing that can at least make it relatively effective?
I went through all of Mixon and Bernard's run plays for the past 2 weeks, and the common denominators here was a severe lack of success in running inside zone and getting their faces crossed on the strong side of the play, on the front side of the play. And honestly, their second level blocking right now is just piss poor. Whether it's Trey Hopkins or John Miller or even Michael Jordan, nobody's getting up to the mic. Nobody's getting up to these linebackers. And yeah, sure, like guys you're blocking the first level, but once Mixon has to make that read or is getting into the hole, you have an unoccupied linebacker there to make the easiest play of his life. Like Quan Alexander had an amazing game against the Bengals. So did Bobby Wagner the week before. Being a linebacker against the Bengals right now is just a linebacker's paradise because they're just being untouched and they just read these simple inside zone plays. So they can get much more creative in terms of play calling, but you also need to be able to identify and find the mic in the second level of blocking. So it's not a tremendously hard thing to fix, but they just still have to do it. I do think that Billy Price is an upgrade over Michael Jordan at left guard. I'm excited to see what Price does at that position because unfortunately for Jordan, not only is he young, but he plays, not only is he tall, but he plays so tall. Like Andrew Whitworth being good at left guard was that was an aberration. Like not a lot of guys his size can play with pad level and leverage like he did playing at left guard. For Michael Jordan, who's 6'6", like he doesn't get low enough, and guys are able to just kind of dip under him. And I'm talking about linebackers too, and just get easy penetration. So you inserting Price in there, working next to Hopkins, who is a great communicator and great at center right now. I think that can provide an upgrade there. Unfortunately, you still have Andre Smith and Bobby Hart to tackle, who will get beat a number of times, both not only in the pass game, but also the run game. So the issues aren't hard to identify, and they're also not hard to fix. But at the end of the day, the personnel that you have still has to step up.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about, the tight ends being more involved in the blocking schemes to help out the offensive line, that sort of thing. I mean, unfortunately, they've put, I noticed, I think it was especially last week, CJ Uzama was put on islands with defensive ends, and that just did not work out well at all. I mean, is this something maybe you use a little more Drew Sample to mix him in, as an additional type of blocker? Maybe do, I saw someone in here. I don't remember who it was. It was Michael Myers saying, basically, that jumbo package, extra offensive lineman, though it's predictable. The Bengals used to be able to do that power run game with Sed Benson. Is that something they need to flirt with? I don't even know if there's enough talent on the offensive line to trot out an extra lineman that would be effective. Yeah. And I don't know if this day and age that type of formation would be effective. But, they need to do something to balance that attack.
It's only effective if you have the personnel to do so. Like, I literally just looked this up. The worst graded run blocking tight end is Drew Sample right now for Pro Football Focus. And he had a not very good game against the 49ers. So yeah, you can trot out and do exactly what the 49ers did. But if you're not athletic, if you're not powerful, if you don't get movement in the first level, it's not going to work. It just creates more congestion for your own game, which if you don't have the blockers to gain movement, it's only going to make it worse. Like for them for the past couple of years, and it was in their best interest to run out of shotgun, run out of these spread formations to minimize the amount of box defenders you have. If you create more box defenders and you don't give your running backs enough space behind the line of scrimmage to operate and get these long developing plays running, it's going to lead to even worse. So I think what they need to do is just make it more simple and make sure that they execute in terms of second level blocking, and they can be somewhat better. Like at the end of the day, your running backs are talented, but you're just not giving them enough space to operate. If you create a more congested environment for that run game and do this quote unquote AFC North power football, it's not going to work because you don't have the personnel.
Yeah. What do you think is more important for this week? Establishing the run and making it, getting it to at least an average type of level in terms of production, or in better defense, especially in the middle part of the defense, and from the safeties, improved defense from really the safeties and the linebackers in particular.
I think, like, if you can't pass in this league, if you can't pass at a high level, you're just going to be at a disadvantage on a week-to-week basis. And yeah, you would like a stronger running game to support it if you don't. But if you can't, like, you just gotta hope that your defense doesn't get absolutely torched. And obviously, giving up 41 points is not going to happen every week. But if you're in a position where your defense can't carry a lackluster quarterback performance, you're just going to be in trouble. And I think it might be harder for them to bounce back as a defense compared to improving the run game, and because you can scheme around that in certain areas. But at the end of the day, if your quarterback can't carry you, and he has to score 30 to win, you're just put in a tough spot.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I guess I think because we have not seen the run game really show much these first 2 weeks, and obviously there's 2 losses that coincide with that. I think I would like to see the run game, especially with Zach Taylor preaching all off season how important the run game is, utilizing play action, being able to properly sell that. I would like to see that. Maybe that requires a weird pass to set up the run. The passing game's been there. They've put up the yards. Andy Dalton has missed some throws and he's hit some others, but maybe a pass to set up the run instead of vice versa. I don't know, but I'd like to see that balance. And I think that would go a long way, especially this week, to kind of, if you've got the defense on its heels a little bit, that's what Zach Taylor obviously has wanted, and he has not been able to get because of offensive line deficiencies. Like you said, free running linebackers on the other team. A lot of times I notice Joe Mixon gets the handoff and there's a guy already at his legs again.
He's very used to just bouncing off immediately.
Yeah. Yeah. It's pretty sad. What about prediction for this week, John?
I would probably say the Bills by like 7 or 10. I think that they're just the better overall team. It's just tough for the Bengals for where they are right now to come back from that performance. And it doesn't help that they're facing, a well-rounded team on the road. I personally don't have a problem with how Zach Taylor's running this offense. I think that, in theory, you would like to see a run pass balanced offense, but if the run game isn't working, you can't just keep forcing it down their throats if you can't go anywhere. You have to rely on the passing game to get the ball moving. And I want to see, better production past the first 15 plays, what is known as like the scripted part of the game, and better efficiency from Dalton, because the Bills have a talented secondary and the talented defense, but at the end of the day, you have one of the most talented receiving corps in the NFL and an offensive line that for the most part of the game will be able to get it done. So I want to see. I don't want to see them go towards the running game 30 times a game if it's not going to work. I want to see this process continuing to develop, and unless something miraculous happens, it just may not be enough on talent alone.
Yeah. Brian McHugh in the live YouTube chat says, I don't care what we do, run or pass. I think this is a must-win game. I think we're going to be surprised, though. Bengals by 10. Wow. I think the Bengals will cover the spread, but I don't think they win. It would not surprise me if they did, though. I think a lot of things would need to go right for them. I think they would need to play their best type of football they have so far this year. I think it might require a surprise return of Cordy Glenn, something like that. But I think this is a winnable game. I said that on the onset. I think this is a winnable game. I don't think this is going into New England and doing that. But I did not like what I saw last week at all. I did not like what I saw last week. No, nor did any Bengals fan, really, I'm sure. But I mean, even from under the surface level, body language and, like I said, effort level, the fact that the first drive of the game, John, was you got the opening kickoff, you got a holding penalty on the kickoff, then it's sack on first down, your running back fumbles the ball on second down, falls on it, and third down, you throw a short pass, and then you punt the ball away. That's not how you start a game at home in your opener. That's just ill-prepared. So there's the surface level of, they got blown out and all that kind of stuff. But there's other stuff as you kind of sift through that. You go, that's really troubling. That's really troubling. And maybe it was just like a perfect storm of things last week. But I do think they play better. I don't know that they come out on top this week. Would not surprise me, but I guess I would say 20-17 Bills at this point is probably my prediction. So we'll see. Peter Nefa says the next 2 games are winnable. They are. So we'll see. Hopefully they can turn some things around, but it's going to take a lot of work, and it's going to take a lot more focus and some guys returning back to the lineup. John, any final thoughts before we get out of here?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is a crucial part of the season. Exile and Oblivion just said the next 3 games. The third game of that docket would be the Cardinals, who are really trying to bring the area into the NFL. But yeah, like Josh Allen, then Mason Rudolph, and Kyler Murray. Like these are inexperienced quarterbacks who are prone to mistakes. But like you said, man, like it was a loss, and the NFL is a week to week thing, and you would think that teams are able to bounce back, but like you said, there was just a lot of issues that were exposed in this game that lead me to believe that there's just bigger problems under the surface of this team, and this game is going to tell us a lot about how they respond.
It is going to tell us a lot about this team, about its mindset, about its coaches. I think this is a big test early in the season for the Bengals. Hopefully they rise up to the challenge there, but this is an immense test for the team. I don't know if this is one of those throw the film out, don't even watch it type of thing. I would, one of those old adages that football teams use, but I think you need to re-examine a lot of your schemes, what you're doing, all of that, and hopefully the Bengals have done that this week. I do want to say a quick thanks to the guys at ESPN Radio Rochester. Mike Danger and Gene Battaglia were the 2 hosts of the Sports Bar. That's the name of their show, and a very aptly named because it's basically kind of after work drive time, maybe happy hour type of radio. So pretty apropos name, but good guys. We had a good interview, and that'll be up on our stream of audio as well. So just want to say a quick thank you to them, and they asked some pretty entertaining questions. So it was a fun time talking to them, and I appreciate their cordial nature and having me on. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. As always, as I've mentioned a couple times, you can get this show wherever you get your podcasts: iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, many others, Megaphone. We also have the YouTube channels for videos like this, both to watch live and after the fact, as well as all of our content being on cincyjungle.com. We'll also be doing post-game reactions. That'll be on our stream as well, so keep your eye out for that. We also have a couple of upcoming announcements about this show, about the SB Nation channel and all of that. So we'll keep you updated as those come as well. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time. And hopefully the Bengals next week, we'll be talking about a 1-2 start instead of an 0-3 start, right? See you, Johnny.
See you, man.